Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We're starting our weekend off with watches, and everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy, trade, or sell. It's your online concierge to ask any question that comes to mind, but especially about the pricing of these watches. Now, we are always looking to build inventory, buy, trade, or sell. If you wish to sell or trade, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. When we buy, we pay cash, we pay fast. With no upper limit on value paid, we will buy an entire collection with a single transfer. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. We've got a front-loaded set of high-value watches coming up, and then a back-loaded set of really heavy pieces in this episode. So let's start with a watch that has just come out in the last year. And I have to say, this was the Rolex Explorer II 1655 tribute that no one saw coming. So, now available pre-owned, the Tudor GMT Pro that is somewhere between a Black Bay GMT and an Explorer II, and it is a fascinating combination. Now, though it has the same MT56-52 movement as the Black Bay GMT, this is a 39mm diameter watch, so it is much more wearable than the Black Bay GMT. It's actually about the size of a Black Bay 58. Now, it's a little bit thicker. The watch is about 14.9mm thick. Add a millimeter for the strap, which is underslung below the case. The watch features the Tudor Rose logo, so mid-1968 back, and then the Shield logo, so mid-1968 forward. We have this lapping machine-style radial satin grain on the bezel that is very evocative of both the 70s in general and the original Explorer II in particular. A bubble-like sapphire, and it is a sapphire, to give the look of a plexiglass. Let me remove these fingerprints. The dial is a combination of Tudor Submariner snowflake hands, Tudor Submariner dial features, and then, of course, the orange arrow of the early Explorer IIs. So we've got an ecru luminova, and one feature that's easy to miss is that while this does look like a vintage printed dial, the indices themselves are solid blocks of lume that are placed on the dial. So you've got that vintage style, the matte black base, you've got the chaptering, a little bit of fotina, but this is a very modern watch. Now you can see all four hands are lumed, and you can also appreciate, as I turn to the side a little bit more, that those indices really do stand proud of the dial, and they have 3 dimensions to them, so all highly attractive. It is a true dual-time watch. One hand, the orange one, moves in a 24-hour circuit around the dial, and then you've also got local time. Attention to detail here is strong. The ecru luminova is the same on the indices. The hands are actually lacquered to match the color. The printing of the dial matches, and so does the color of the date disc itself. Throwing the watch on my wrist. It's a little over 47 millimeters from lug to lug. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference. It's a good match. 70-hour power reserve, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, COSC certified Swiss chronometer, and a true dual time. It's got a lot going for it. And the strap is conventional. Though it looks like a NATO, there are typical perforations and a conventional pin buckle built in, so it's easy to set it and adjust it. I mentioned that this episode is front-loaded with good value, and here we have one of the most interesting watches you can buy under $10,000. This is technically called the Spring Drive Automatic SBGA 407, but everyone calls it the Skyflake. Now, it's not as severe and modern as the SBGA 211 Snowflake. This is part of the Heritage Collection, so it has a case design drawn directly from the original 1960 3180, the first Grand Seiko, which is why you have this dramatically domed sapphire that looks like a plexi. You have this rounded traditional case, separate lugs. It's 40.2 millimeters in diameter, just to be clear, and though the watch is dress-oriented, it is 100 meters water resistant, so you can absolutely wear this in a versatile fashion. Now, the dial is the hook. You can see that it is beautifully ruffled and roughed, and it has a wonderful snowdrift style surfacing, and that was really the idea behind the original Snowflake, which was an official nickname by Grand Seiko. That's not something collectors came up with. The idea was to create the image of the driven snow outside of their watch studio in Shiojiri, where these spring drives are made. Now, the case is what's called Zaratsu Black Polished. It's done on a European Zalitz machine, but the foremost practitioners of this tin plate polishing method are the people in Japan at Seiko and Grand Seiko. It is optically smooth and mirrored, and again, you hold the surface to be milled directly against a spinning tin plate. So this is a true hand-finished watch, and it is beautifully executed. The dial furniture is also superb. As you can see, the black polish on the hand's logo and indices, and then they're also faceted. This is done on diamond-tipped milling tools by artisans who just make these parts all day. That is their specialty. The seconds hand, which sweeps in smooth spring-drive fashion, is actually fired blue steel. So that's real fired steel. And the movement is a spring drive caliber 9R65, automatic winding, 3-day power reserve. No batteries, no capacitors, no motors. There's a unidirectional governing wheel that generates an induced electrical current. That wakes up a quartz oscillator. That provides electromagnetic braking to the wheel. All of these features in sync contribute to accuracy of plus or minus 15 seconds per month. So it is a mechanically driven watch with quartz accuracy. Best of both worlds, really. Okay, Zenith Chronomaster Sport. This watch came out last year, and yes, it is very similar to a famous chronograph from Geneva. That said, it is its own watch, and I'd say this angle is probably where you get the best advantage of that. Oddly, there's a lot of condensation in here today. It's almost as though it's super cold. But the watch is 41 millimeters in diameter, and as you can see, it is a timepiece that has a white lacquered dial, a black ceramic bezel, but where it's uniquely Zenith is in the application of the chronograph. So you can see that the bezel is not a tachymeter bezel. It is a 10-second bezel, and there's a foudroyant seconds hand that allows you to read tenths of seconds. So, for example, I can see that this is 8 seconds and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths of a second. The El Primero has always been able to resolve 1/10 of a second, but the high-beat chronograph has not always had scales on its dial that made it easy to read those fractions. So now with this system, not only is it visually spectacular, but you do have the ability to easily read those fractions of a second. Turn the light off real quick, get a sense of the lume. The watch is well lumed, steel, automatic, and 100 meters water resistant, so it's a real sports watch. It has a feature that historically the El Primeros did not have, which is a hacking seconds function, and it is a column wheel lateral clutch chrono. This is the new caliber 3600, the second generation El Primero that came out in 2019, so it's got 60 hours of power reserve rather than the old 50, and it does gain that hacking seconds function. Let me pop open the clasp here, and you can see that the watch includes, let's go a little bit closer, that's why we have zoom. The watch includes a handsomely executed movement, lateral clutch, automatic winding, 10 beats per second. You can see the blued column wheel. The column wheel feel here really is superb. It feels great. It sounds great. It's exemplary. This is one of the best watches you can buy in the chronograph class for around $10,000. A real comfortable piece, low enough to fit underneath the cuff, and you can see that well here. Because it does include a ceramic bezel, it's fairly scratch resistant. Most of the offending blows are going to hit the crystal or they're going to hit the bezels. This watch is going to retain its shine long term. There's a 3-link bracelet. It's a handsome and comfortable design, and then there's a clasp with a clamshell lock. The watch is probably fine for a wrist down to 14 centimeters in circumference. You can get an accessory strap that makes it fit even better. All right, now we go from fairly large brands to one that is vanishingly small. Torsti Lane is a Finnish-born and educated watchmaker who works out of Laloque, Switzerland. Now, after he graduated from the Finnish watchmaking school, which I think is in Tapiola, he went to work for Lange and Voutilainen, and you can see some of the house styles there have rubbed off on this master watchmaker. So this is the Torsti Lane Gelidus II. The name means chill, frosty, or icy in Latin, which is probably appropriate for a Finnish watchmaker because the watch is sober and somewhat conservative. It has a little bit of a cool, collected look to it, very classical. The dial is reminiscent of something like a Patek Philippe 5196P or a vintage Patek Philippe 570 Calatrava. You have these lovely Breguet-style Arabic numerals, several different tracks, including small seconds. The dial base is media blasted. The whole thing is made of one piece. The only additional pieces on this dial are the cannon pinion hands and the nameplate, which is fixed by screws. You can see the nameplate is satinated on its top and then mirror beveled on its edge. The finish is outstanding. So the media blasted dial base gets a salmon coating to give it a lovely contrast with the brushed silvered tops of the numerals, and everything here again is one disc of metal. It's machined down to look this way and then finished. Now on the side you can see we have 3 different types of finish. The lug hoods and the bezel are polished. The case flank is satinated. We have the Torsti Lane branded, there's the L right there, Lane branded crown, and then we have media blasting, so he etches out the flanks of the case to create a little bit of evacuation and then media blasts their interior. When you turn the movement over, you can see this is the LA18 movement, and it is based on the Unitas 6498. So you can see the drivetrain is basically the same, but the parts are made and finished by Lane, which means the standard is surpassing for what you pay. Now, this watch is priced used around $8,000. You're not going to get this much hand finishing for anywhere near that from other brands. You can see there's the hand finished nameplate. We have sharp outward points where bevels meet on the nameplate, but also all over the bridges in the movement, and it's gorgeous to see those sharp points where two bevels converge. That is as difficult to do as interior angles. Now you can see the bridges adjacent to the balance. We've got the escape wheel and then the balance cock. Those are made of steel, so they're satinated on their top and then mirror beveled on their side. And you can see the beveling here is outstanding. Several different finishes on the bridges. You can see the sheer faces are satinated, the rounded edge is mirror beveled. Then we have these raised satinated channels that run all the way around the edge of the bridge, and then the interior has been hollowed out and media blasted and then gilded with rose gold. We have black polished click as well as screws. The screws are chamfered. We have solarization on the crown wheel and double solarization on the ratchet wheel atop the barrel. The watch is manual wind. It's a slow beat, 18,000 vibration per hour pocket watch style beat rate with a 50-hour power reserve, and the whole watch is 40.5 millimeters, so it wears really nicely on a small wrist. Torcy Lane doesn't make a lot of watches each year. So you can see that this watch is going to be both handsome and uncommon. And it is low enough. It is under 11 millimeters thick, which makes it ideal for fitting underneath the cuff. It's a real versatile timepiece. Okay, now things are going to start to get a little bit more intense. Starting with what might be my favorite modern Portugueser. This is the reference 544404. It is a lovely white gold Portugueser Regulateur. So the Portuguese Regulateur was a short run watch made from 2007 to 2009. It's 43.1 millimeters in white gold, and you can see the watch has a lovely Audemars, as IWC, or as I would say, sunburst anthracite metallic dial. It is a regulator, so we have our hours, we have our minutes, we have our seconds. The watch does include a hacking seconds function, and the crown is one of the most solid I've ever encountered. There is no wobble to this crown. It speaks to the build quality of the watch, which is outstanding, and there's hardly any dead angle as I turn the crown. You'll also appreciate the fact that this watch uses a traditional pocket watch caliber. This is the caliber 98245. It is a true pocket watch movement, over 37 millimeters in diameter. The Portugueser, as originally created in 1939, was envisioned as a wristwatch, purpose-built, that would be as accurate as a pocket watch. At the time, the only way to do that was to build a wristwatch from scratch that was big enough to accommodate a pocket watch movement, because those movements were more accurate. So here we have a pocket watch movement properly sized for an oversized dress watch. Now, it's also a very vintage architecture, as we have a crown wheel, a ratchet wheel, an enormous swan's neck style, a click spring, and then we have a hinged extensible click, which you can see right there. That's all drawn from the pocket watch era, as is the three-quarter style plate over the barrel and the drivetrain. We have the Jones arrow, a enormous fine adjustment mechanism that can be traced back to the designs of F.A. Jones, the American founder of IWC, in 1868. And then we have an enormous balance beaten away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. It does have an overcoil hairspring. It is 5-position adjusted, and it does have a hacking system with the world's largest hacking lever. You can actually see it move right underneath my finger, just like that. So the watch can be set precisely to a reference time. The balance is enormous. It's almost the radius of the movement, and the finishing is to a high degree impressive. Actually, it looks more handmade than most IWC watches, and the details matter here. You can see they even include little gold chaton to fix the pivot jewels of the train, which is a nod to the pocket watch era. Now, on my wrist, the watch is large, but not ungainly. Taking a quick look, it's weighty, made of white gold and over 43 millimeters in diameter. You really feel it. It's satisfying. It's what you imagine a luxury watch would feel like, and it's flat enough that you can easily fit it underneath the cuff. So the Portugueser was oversized from the beginning, but critically a dress watch as well, and it remains exactly that. If you want to buy a Portugueser, there are many different options. As with Jaeger, LeCoultre, and the Reverso, it's hard to argue there is a definitive Portugueser model, so you pick the one you like best that suits your style and your preferences. And for me, that is the 5444 Regulateur. It is a rare watch in any form, but this white gold Ardoise dial is the most attractive, at least to my eye. Now, here's a 2018 limited edition of 150 pieces in steel, just over 44 millimeters. It's the IWC Portuguese or Portugueser annual calendar. Now, some folks ask, why is it called Portugueser in Portuguese? Well, Portugueser is German for Portuguese, and of course, IWC is a German-Swiss watchmaker in the northeast of the company out of Schaffhausen. So this is the Middle Eastern edition of the Portugueser annual calendar. So we have this lovely verdure on the dial with contrasting rose gold accents. It's nicely balanced with twin registers, one for constant seconds, one for power reserve. It has a 7-day automatic winding power reserve, an annual calendar, and you can see it is month, date, and day, and there's a quick set for that. You need to adjust it only once a year during the jump from February to March. Turn it all over. You can see we have a 52,000 series caliber in here. This is the 52830, and it is a gorgeous looking machine, very handsome, and you can see that the twin barrels are one of the evolutions from the 51,000 series to the 52,000 series. So previously, this movement in its previous lives as the 5,000, the 50,000, and the 51,000 series, it had a 7-day power reserve and one huge barrel. The problem was it tended to gallop when fully wound. And then not only did it tend to gallop when fully wound, it tended to slow down a lot towards the tail end of its power reserve, with the result being that the watch didn't always keep good time at the extremes of its power reserve. Well, with twin barrels, that problem goes away as the movement is more even in its torque release to maintain a more constant amplitude, or at least a closer amplitude spacing through its service life. Now, the movement, and I'm sorry, I think I called it the 52830, it's the 52850, and you can see it has the Peloton winding system in ceramic. So you've got a skeletonized bridge for the two barrels. You have a more even torque release from max wind to minimum wind. The escapement now is 28,800 vibrations per hour rather than the previous 21,600. And you can see that the Peloton with both pawl and pawl wheel, black ceramic, so no lubrication required and no wear to create dirt on the movement. And this caliber, oversized and automatic, is one of the world's largest automatics. It's an IWC manufacturer movement, and it's over 37 millimeters in diameter, so it properly fills this case back. Now, throwing the watch on my wrist, do a quick inspection of the clasp. It's media blasted inside and polished, and externally polished and satinated. It's a big watch. It's actually larger than the regulator you just saw. There's no doubt about that. I'm not sure it's tangibly larger, but it measures larger. I think if you can wear one, you can wear the other. That said, I do believe this is a watch for wrists of 16 centimeters circumference. That's my size, or larger, because it is very broad. Okay, a little bit of FP Journe. Now, in vintage collecting circles, pink on pink is highly desirable. That describes vintage watches that have rose gold cases and rose gold dials, and usually the dial color is just rose gold, well, colored. Here, we have a watch that is 40 millimeters in rose gold, and the dial is a media blasted solid disc of rose gold. But not only is this pink on pink, this is pink on pink on pink, as this discontinued Tourbillon Souverain in 40 millimeters includes a solid rose gold movement. Now you see, the Remontoir d'Égalité is a limited sort of power reserve that exists between the barrel and the escapement. So you have this linear titanium spring, and every second it loads up a little bit of energy and then dumps it via the secondary escapement into the primary escapement, which is the one on the tourbillon carriage. So what this does is, for 28 hours, the balance can maintain constant amplitude, because regardless of the state of the barrel through those 28 hours, the balance and escapement receive constant force. So if you wind this watch at the same time every day, it will maintain constant amplitude. It will be very accurate. It's adjusted in 6 positions and then free sprung, so that nothing that happens on the wrist can change the timing of the watch. Free sprung architectures are very shock and bump and concussion and vibration tolerant. Now, we also have an overcoil hairspring here. So in any physical position, regardless again of what the tourbillon is doing, the watch is going to keep very good time, mostly due to the presence of the overcoil more than the tourbillon itself. And Journe has said that for the most part, it's the overcoil and the remontoir that contribute to the accuracy of this watch. Now, as long as the deadbeat second system is operating, you know that the remontoir is operating, because the underpinning of that deadbeat is actually the remontoir escapement. So Just take note of that and keep the watch wound. Now, because this is described as a chronometre style timepiece, you could say it says chronometre on the back. We also have a marine chronometer style power reserve. So what it tells you is how many hours since the last full winding, because on a navigation clock or a marine chronometer, it's important to rewind every 24 hours on the 24th hour at a regular interval. So on a navigation clock, it's important to know how many hours since the last winding, not how much power remains, which is why this watch, when fully wound, shows 0 hours since fully wound. Now, the watch is about 10 millimeters thick, which makes it pretty trim for what's inside the case. With a solid gold case style and movement, it's very weighty, and it's a discontinued watch, as circa 2019, this model was retired. Now, I should also mention it is a GPHG luminary, and it is actually the GPHG Aiguille d'Or, or the overall winner at the Oscars of watchmaking back in 2004. And this one includes the discontinued French-made Eleanor cases. I often say this, but it's worth repeating. These were discontinued after about mid-2008, and you can see the Eleanor maker's mark, and then next to it, those two identical stamps. Those are French hallmarks. You can also see Swiss hallmarks, because the watch would have passed through both companies during its manufacture. It includes both hallmarks, and again, that is a bygone thing, because in 2008, Journe bought the company, Eleanor, and moved it to Geneva to become Boîtier de Genève, Journe's case factory. So same folks, for the most part, who made this case, but they're making it in a different country now, and this is just a sign of the times. You can sort of guess the age of the watch just based on the fact that it's a Tourbillon Souverain from 2004 with the roughly pre-2008 case, okay? Now, here's an all-time great. This is one of my favorite watches, and it's certainly one of my top 3 favorite Audemars Piguet. This is the Star Wheel. It's based on the Renaissance wandering clock complication, and the way this works is you have a system that includes wheels underpinned by stars that are indexed by springs. And so you have a little scale from 0 to 60, and you follow the numeral that enters stage left and then moves across the dial. It is a digital indication system. So right now it is 10:15, now it's 10:20, and as the numeral exits stage right, you can see that the next one moves into position as the star wheel aligns the correct hour. And that's how that works. And you can also see that the dial is beautifully cut on a rose lathe with a lovely Grand Dorche or barleycorn guilloche. Underneath these 3 sapphire wheels, you can see there's a hand-finished carousel. And when this watch was launched in 1991, Audemars Piguet was actually a 40% stakeholder in Jaeger-LeCoultre, which is why this watch uses a JLC movement. It's a JLC 889, impressively made, and back then JLC used a lot more hand finishing on its movements. This was considered to be one of the premier ultra-thin automatic high horology calibers at the time, and again, there was a little bit of a family connection between AP and JLC back then. The watch wears well on my wrist. It's a 36 millimeter case, so think traditionally sized Datejust. It's very thin for what it is. You can also see it showing its age, and I don't mean in the wear and tear sense, but in the signs of the times sense, as the case was laterally hallmarked. That's something that wasn't done much after the late 90s. That's more of a early 90s and back type of practice. As in the modern era, most watch companies have the stamps between the lugs, under the lugs, or on the case back. So this is something you'll also find on Pateks from the period. It's a lovely vintage evocative watch that looks great in yellow gold, and now part of a line that debuted 31 years ago. Really does have vintage street cred. And if you've ever wondered where the modern crop of wandering hours, everyone from Urwerk to Vacheron to Gorilla has used this system. Audemars Piguet brought it into watchmaking in the early 90s, and this is one of AP's greatest ever watches. Okay, but some people prefer simplicity on their dials, and that's exactly what Moser gives us with this Endeavor Center Second Concept Funky Blue. So it's everything Moser is all about. Minimalism. We have the concept dial. No indices, no printing, not even a national origin statement. Funky blue, a Moser signature color. That's the color you see at the center, and it's a fumet dial, another Moser signature, fading from light at the center to dark at the edge. This 50-piece limited edition is 40 millimeters in stainless steel, and Moser machines its cases and then hand finishes. And that's how you can get the depth of these scallops and the lugs, and then they mirror polish the interior. The watch, of course, features a little secret in the form of a double hairspring, and when you see this violet-fired seconds hand on a Moser watch, you know to look for this. So you can see this HMC 200 movement. It is a sports watch movement with a 3-day power reserve. There is a hacking seconds function, but take a look. Another clue as to what lies within is this blued balance bridge. When you see that, you know to look for 2 hairsprings. They are 180 degrees out of alignment. There are 2 black polished stud holders. The idea being that regardless of which position you hold the watch, those hairsprings, due to gravity, will be in error by an equal and opposite amount. So if one wants to speed up because of the orientation, the other in the exact opposite position will want to slow down by an equal and opposite margin. So it's almost exactly what you would get on a traditional pocket watch tourbillon, only it works in a wristwatch format and the correction is instantaneous. Now, Moser makes all the parts of the movement. They make the bridges, the plates, and the wheels, yes, but they also make the hairspring, the escapement, and the balance wheels, and those are generally regarded as the tougher pieces to make when you are building a movement. Plus, being free-sprung with a full balance bridge, this movement is quite robust, and it's an easy watch to wear. A very accurate watch, again, a 3-day automatic winding power reserve, wears easily underneath a sleeve, and you can see that to good effect, and suitable for wrists as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. Very comfortable and very rare, as Moser likes to say. Now, this is a watch that came out in 2018. It is based on the Singer Track 1, and it's the Track 1 Hong Kong edition. Now, of course, Singer Reimagined is probably the grandest and most celebrated resto-mod car builder on the planet. Rob Dickinson founding the company to modify 964-era Porsche 911s to a higher standard of fit, finish, performance, and luxury. This watch is part of a joint venture between Singer and Marco Borrachino, who is a designer and watch executive who created the style of the timepiece. Now, the watch is 43 millimeters in diameter in ceramized aluminum, so not only is it feather light, but the exterior is incredibly scratch resistant. The watch is 100 meters water resistant, and you can see that the movement is outstanding. This is the Chronograph 6361. The movement has a rotor on the dial side, so it's an automatically you can't see the rotor with a 55-hour power reserve. Now, the watch has an uncommon way of telling time. The chronograph is at the center of the watch. So what you're actually looking at is chronograph seconds, minutes, and hours, and they're all radially displayed at the center. You can see there's a lovely polished steel cap atop the seconds hand. So it's very easy to read, and the watch does give you enormous scales. So taking a quick look at the actual time-telling functions, when I pull the crown out, you can see down at 6 o'clock, there's a little index. Now I'm looking at 6:35, now I'm looking at 6:40, and now I'm looking at 7 o'clock. So the chronograph actually gets pride of place here. You'll also appreciate that the watch includes, among other things, coaxial hours, minutes, and seconds with a true chronograph 60 minutes display. I should probably wind this one a little bit more before I bring it on camera. There we go. Now the watch includes a bullhead style start-stop mechanism. And it's very easy to use with forefinger and thumb when it's on your wrist. It is a motorsports-inspired chrono. We'll do a quick loom shot here. The watch is very appealing in the dark and quite entertaining in that regard. The time might even be more spectacular. You get that wonderful persistence of vision light ring when you accelerate the time in the dark, and you can adjust it both ways. The Chronograph movement is spectacular. It uses a lateral clutch that combines the features of a vertical clutch and a lateral clutch for maximum function and minimum play. Of course, the 55-hour power reserve is automatically wound, and the quality of the movement is such that Jean-Marc Wiederrecht, who is the founder of Audemars, the Geneva movement specialist that builds this movement, but he has said that the movement technically meets the finishing standards for the Poinçon de Genève. He simply hasn't applied for the certification due to the cost that it would add to the watch, but it is up to that standard and very impressive. There's a crisp multi-level column wheel, and the column wheel feel really is best in the industry. The finishing's outstanding, and thanks to the dial side rotor, there's nothing to block your view. And again, 100 meters water resistant, so this is really a full-service sports watch. Whether you're a Porsche guy, a Ferrari guy, or you're not even a car enthusiast, this is a great way to put a high-performance machine inspired by the road on your wrist. And frankly, if you didn't know it was connected to a car brand, you'd never know, because this timepiece is a fantastic chronograph in every regard. You can see that everything right down to the clasp and the strap has a sense of occasion to it. Now, let's say you want to be a bit more overt with your car chronograph. Well, back in 2006, Audemars Piguet did exactly that, making 150 pieces of this, the Audemars Piguet Millinery MC12 Tourbillon chronograph. It's named after the Ferrari Enzo-based MC12 Maserati supercar, of which 50 were made and 13 were constructed for competition in FIA GT. Well, the watch incorporates Maserati's signature corporate blue, the company Trident logo, and then a grille design reminiscent of heat exchangers on Maserati cars, but also a dashboard-like set of instruments that double as a dial and power reserve. We have a little scale that works like gas gauge, so you know how much you have left, a tachymeter scale calibrated to 550 units, base 1000, useful for gauging the speed of a Maserati MC12 over a kilometer. This too, like the Singer, has a bullhead-style chronograph, and what's really nice is that it includes a tourbillon on the dial side and visibility into the two barrels that provide nearly 10 days of manual winding power reserve. So let's see how close we can get without corrupting your vision here. Now, the watch is loomed. We'll do a quick loom shot here. Not a lot of loom, but it's there. Now, about the tourbillon. You could see it is a 1-minute tourbillon beating away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. It's free sprung, adjusted in 5 positions, and it has an overcoil. Every refinement I want to see on a credible high horology watch. This is an APRP built movement. If you know Audemars Piguet, you know this is like the hot rod of Audemars Piguet. APRP is their ultra haute de gamme division. Now you can see the name of Maserati on the mainspring barrel, as well as the other mainspring barrel bearing the name of Audemars Piguet, and it is immaculate. Finished. I've often talked about Audemars Piguet watches being a combination of manual and mechanical finish, but on a watch like this with a movement like this, the finish is manual. You can appreciate that on the reverse side, we have a column wheel lateral clutch chronograph, very traditional. It's caliber 2884, and you can see we have a combination of silver satin, blue satin, we have mirrored anglage, and we have a blackened base plate. It is a dramatic looking watch, and it's 47 millimeters across, all in platinum, so it's hefty. It has a Maserati corporate blue alligator leather strap. We'll throw it on my wrist. It's not too broad across the wrist, so in spite of its size, it actually wears well. You can see that the lugs are nowhere near the edge of my wrist, but I will tell you, the heft of this egg-shaped watch is absolutely incredible. It's right up there with the platinum Royal Oak 42s. This thing is monstrous, but you get a lot. Column wheel chronograph, 10-day power reserve, tourbillon, power reserve indicator, platinum case, limited edition, and an APRP movement to top all. Speaking of large precious metal Royal Oaks, we've got one right here. This is a 2022 launch based on the 2021 redesign of the Royal Oak Offshore Diver. This is the Royal Oak Offshore Diver, 42 millimeter, white gold with ceramic bezel, 300 pieces. We'll do a quick loom shot here because this watch is well loomed and it deserves its moment. Beyond the spotlight. Okay, so there you go right there. Not only is the dial loomed, but the bezel is also loomed. The bezel is an internal rotating bezel. You've got a little ceramic shouldered crown up at 10 o'clock. It's a screw down. And you've got a ratcheting mechanism so you can adjust the bezel of this 300-meter water-resistant dive watch, and it is an ISO 6425 diver, so this is the real thing. The bezel is ceramic and this highly scratch-resistant. The case is white gold, and you can see one thing that Audemars Piguet still does to give their white gold cases an ultra-bright shine. They use rhodium plating. It's either rhodium or palladium. It's a platinum family metal, I can tell, because this is as bright as platinum. Like if I go back and I bring in the MC12 again, you can see that white gold is not supposed to be this bright. So Audemars Piguet uses a coating to make it ultra bright. Now, if it's ever scratched, they can always reapply it when the watch goes in for service, but they clearly want their white gold watches to stand apart from the pack, and that's why they use this coating, because it makes white gold look like platinum. Okay, turning the watch over, and by the way, I've got a great example of a uncoated white gold case right here. You can see how warm this Grubel 4C white gold case is compared to the literally blinding white flash of the Audemars Piguet. And you can see the same here too. With this Patek Philippe Aquanaut chronograph, you can really see the difference between unplated gray gold and a plated, rhodium-plated white gold. It is dramatic. Okay, back to the AP for a moment. Let's talk a little bit about the tech specs. First, a feature I love. Audemars Piguet gives you a quick release system, so you just push some buttons on the underside of the strap, it pops right out. If you want to refit it, it's very easy. Works like a car seat belt buckle. There's even a little mechanism inside the clasp to allow you to easily remove the clasp from the strap, because if you can remove the strap from the case, but the buckle is stuck on the strap, you can't swap straps. So you pull that little blocker out of the way, and then the strap slides out, you push it back down, and now it's locked. You can see this too is blindingly white. The caliber, new, 4302. What's different from the old 3120? Well, power reserve, it's now 70 rather than 60, and beat rate, it's now 8 per second rather than 6, which makes it a better sports watch caliber. Also, the old caliber 3120 was 26.6 millimeters in diameter. This is 32, so it better fills the case back, and you can see this is a 300-piece limited edition. We'll throw it on my wrist and get a look at it. It's a handsome piece. It's very comfortable, but you need a big wrist for it. As with all Offshores, it wears larger. Think of it as a 44 millimeter round watch, and you got a good sense of how this rated 42 actually wears. Okay, so I teased and now I show. Patek Philippe Aquanaut 5968G. This is the Aquanaut flyback chronograph, and it is a flyback chrono. Reset, restart, one push of the trigger. This model came out in 2021 alongside a white gold green dial model. So we have the geosphere cut with a gradient from light at the center to dark at the edge. We have white gold indices and numerals. The watch has plenty of luminescence, absolutely no shortage of that. Both indices and numerals are illumined. The watch also includes 120-meter water resistance, so being automatic winding, well lumed, and highly water resistant is a true sports watch. We have a rubber strap, they call it composite, I call it rubber, double deployment clasp, twin trigger release in matching gray gold. Remember, gray gold is 18 karat white gold that is white all the way through. It's not as white as rhodium-plated white gold, as we know from just a moment ago, but on the other hand, if it's scratched, you don't have a different color showing through. Now, one feature I really like about this watch is that the minutes register for the chronograph is 60 minutes. So it's much easier here to use your chronograph if you want to time something over 30 minutes, because you don't have to figure out whether you're in the first or second set of 30 minutes. Reverse side, automatic movement, Patek Philippe 28520, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, 6-position adjustment, accuracy guarantee from the factory. It will keep time to no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day. 55-hour reserve, column wheel, and vertical clutch. The column wheel means it has great pusher feel. The vertical clutch means when you start the chrono, there's no jump to the seconds hand, and you can leave the chronograph running without additional wear and tear. That is another advantage of the vertical clutch chrono. Now, the watch is large. It's 42.2 millimeters in diameter, so on my wrist you can see we're not at the limit, but I wouldn't wear this watch on a wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference. That said, it is under 13 millimeters thick, which makes it quite slim, and you can fit it underneath the cuff. So lug to lug, you can see that it's not too broad, but because the strap has a bit of stiffness, there's some artificial diameter baked in, so it wants to wear like a bigger watch because of the stiffness of the strap. You can't just pull it straight down. Okay, I teased, and now I give you what I consider to be the most historically important and technically innovative watch on today's show. At least in terms of technical innovation, it's only got one rival in the Audemars movement we saw earlier on the Singer, but it's not as beautiful. No, the Singer is not as beautiful as the Grubel 4C double tourbillon 30 degree. So this is the first watch that Grubel and 4C launched under their own names back in 2005. 2 tourbillon regulators. One, the outer tourbillon, moves in a 4-minute circuit, which is why you have this a 4-piece quartered serpentine, and it traces a scale of 60 seconds, and 60 seconds times 4 gets you to 4 minutes. The inner tourbillon is inclined at 30 degrees, it says so, and it rotates in 1-minute circuits. So the result of having those 2 tourbillons spinning at differential rates and disparate angles is that, especially when the watch is on your dresser at night, it is going to cancel out the effects of gravity, doing exactly what Abraham Louis Breguet envisioned a tourbillon would do in a pocket watch application. So it is canceling out the effects of gravity and looking great while doing it. The structure on which the tourbillon is mounted is all rounded and black polished. We have screw-fixed pivot chaton for the staff of the tourbillon, and that's a nod to the pocket watch era, as is this gilded finish. Grubel and Forsey use a wire brush to create this rusticated, grained surfacing. As a steel wire brush, you just dab, 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 sometimes for up to an hour to create what you see here. The anglage is a mile wide, and you better believe it's done by hand. The base plate features a satination, and then there's also engine turning. You have both. The tourbillon carriage, of course, features a black polished cage and black polished stanchions on which the tourbillon is mounted. You can see that they project on both sides. We have an overcoil hairspring, a 6-position adjustment, and a free sprung balance. Despite the fact that it is a mighty machine with a power-intensive complication, we do have a large power reserve courtesy of multiple mainspring barrels, and you can see that the power reserve manually wound is 72 hours. The dial is made of solid gold, and as you can see, it features polished applique Roman numerals and stick indices, blued assembly screws. We also have black polished screws, and the screw heads are polished, the slots are chamfered, and there is more, because if you look on the interior of the wheels, or at least the ones that are visible here, you can see that the inner circumference of the wheels chamfered, and the interior of the spokes also chamfered, creating many sharp interior angles. This is Grubel Forsey at its absolute best. I'm not going to lie, some of the Balancier Sport models seem like Grubel Forsey reaching to hit a price and a mass market. This watch was built with cost no object, and it's a little bit quirky. As you can see in profile, we have a sort of sine wave to remind you of the frequency of the star regulating organ within. It's a little nod and a wink to what lies inside the case. You can also see that the lugs have a little bit of a dish to them. They have a bit of an inward concave inflection, and this is the kind of subtlety that people don't associate with Robert Grubel's designs. There are a lot of lovely little nuances that you discover the more time you spend with the watch. Now, at 43.5 millimeters, this is actually a small watch by Grubel Forsey standards. It's wearable. I could wear it. I think if you have a wrist of 16 centimeters circumference or larger, you can wear this watch quite well. My hand's actually quite large. I'm not a small guy. I could wear this watch well, but keep in mind, all in white gold, it is heavy, so you better like a watch that's weighty. This is one of the most historically important timepieces of the modern era, the first and breakthrough watch by one of the most important independents in an era when independent watchmaking is king. This should be as interesting to the market and to collectors as something like a Souscription tourbillon from F.P. Journe, because in my opinion, this is a more interesting watch to look at, a more technically ambitious watch, and without a doubt, a scarcer watch than the various versions of the Tourbillon Remontoire and Tourbillon Souverain. So reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.